Right. So let's talk about something that sounds a little crazy.
Yeah.
The U.S. buying Greenland. I
Hmm.
know. I know.
Interesting.
It sounds like something straight out of like The Onion or something like that.
Right.
But it's not a new idea, and it's not some internet conspiracy theory.
Mm.
This is something that has been kicked around for quite a while, and President Trump even floated it back in 2019.
Yeah.
So today we are going to dive deep
Right.
and figure out,
Into this fascinating topic.
yeah, is there anything more to this idea than meets the eye?
You're absolutely right.
Okay.
You has been making the rounds for a while.
Okay.
What's interesting is that while it sounds like this modern day kind of power grab,
Yeah.
the concept of countries buying territory from each other is actually pretty old.
Really?
Yeah.
I always just assumed that was like a one-off thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
I remember the Louisiana Purchase, but I always figured that was it,
Uh-huh.
you know?
Yeah, it might seem unusual from our modern perspective.
Right.
But there are actually quite a few examples throughout history.
Okay.
The U.S. itself
Yeah.
acquired a massive amount of its territory this way. I
I'm-
mean, the Louisiana Purchase, you mentioned that
Yeah.
Alaska, Florida, all of these were acquired through sovereignty purchases.
Yeah. I guess I never really put it all together. It's like,
Right. Uh-huh.
but if this was so common, why don't we hear about it more often?
Hmm.
And what about Greenland specifically?
Well, think back to the 1800s.
Okay.
In 1845, the King of Denmark sold territories in India to the East India Company.
Wow.
And just a few decades later, in 1898, Germany leased Qingdao from China.
Uh-huh.
The same year, the UK leased territory in Kowloon, which later became part of Hong Kong. These types of deals were happening all over the world.
So buying and selling land was just the way things were done back then.
Yeah.
It sounds more like a game of risk than international diplomacy.
Yeah, it's easy to look back and judge through a modern lens.
Right.
But at the time, it was a generally accepted practice.
Yeah.
And you're right about Denmark.
Oh.
In the early 1900s, after losing Schleswig-Holstein to Prussia,
Okay.
Denmark actually considered selling Greenland to the U.S.
Wow.
to shore up their finances and strategic position.
So this Greenland idea has been around longer than I thought.
Yeah,
And Denmark was actually open to it.
they were.
We did buy the Virgin Islands from them in 1917, right?
Exactly. And that's a great example of how these deals were often driven by strategic interests.
Yeah.
You know, the U.S. saw the value in the Virgin Islands location.
Right.
And Denmark, facing financial pressures after World War I, saw an opportunity.
Yeah.
But as with many historical precedents, the rights and interests of the people living in these territories were often ignored. Agreements were made without their consent and sometimes even involved coercion or pressure.
That's a pretty sobering thought.
Yeah,
It shifts the whole conversation, doesn't it?
yeah.
It's not just about whether buying land is legal
Right.
or historically common,
Right.
but whether it's ethical, especially in today's world.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like, is that even okay?
Yeah, that's a big question.
Yeah.
A big question. Yeah, it definitely adds a whole other layer of complexity.
It does.
If we're talking about a potential deal for Greenland today,
Yeah.
we can't just brush those ethical concerns aside.
Exactly. It's not like buying a used car.
Right.
You know, we're talking
Yeah.
about people's lives, their homes, their culture.
Mm,
So how do we even begin to approach this in a way that's
right.
ethical and respectful?
Well, the first step is acknowledging that Greenland is not just a piece of real estate.
Right.
It's home to a vibrant Inuit culture with its own unique history, language, and traditions.
Yeah.
Any conversation about a potential deal has to start with recognizing and respecting
Okay.
their right to self-determination.
Okay, so self-determination,
Yes.
what does that actually mean?
It means that the people of Greenland have the right to freely determine their own political status and pursue their own economic, social, and cultural development. They
Ah.
get to decide their own future
Okay.
without being pressured or coerced by outside forces.
So no backroom deals,
Exactly.
no shady negotiations. It sounds straightforward enough.
Yeah,
But how do you ensure a whole population gets to weigh in on something this big?
that's a great question.
Like, how do you even...
A referendum would be a crucial step.
Okay.
Give the people of Greenland the opportunity to directly vote on whether they even want to consider a deal with the U.S.
Okay.
It has to be a transparent process
Right.
where everyone feels like they have a voice
Okay.
and their vote truly matters.
That makes sense.
Right.
A referendum puts the power directly in the hands of the people.
Right.
But let's be honest.
Sure.
A deal like this wouldn't be a simple yes or no question.
No, it wouldn't.
It would be incredibly complex, right?
It would be very complex.
What are some of the other factors that would need to be
Hmm.
carefully considered?
Well, you're absolutely right. It wouldn't be a simple transaction.
Right.
The agreement would need to clearly outline the rights and responsibilities
Okay.
of both the U.S. and Greenland,
Uh-huh.
everything from land ownership and resource management
Yeah.
to cultural preservation and political representation
Wow.
would have to be on the table.
It's starting to sound like untangling a giant knot.
It is a very complex issue
Yeah.
with many different factors to consider.
We'd be talking about economic considerations, legal frameworks,
Absolute.
environmental impacts, cultural sensitivity.
All of that.
This is
Yeah.
this is mind-boggling.
It's a lot.
Are there any examples of countries successfully navigating
Yeah.
this kind of complex sovereignty transfer?
There are examples where the process has been more successful than others.
Okay.
You can look at Scotland's independence referendum in 2014.
Uh-huh.
While they ultimately voted to remain part of the UK, the process itself demonstrated a commitment to democratic principles and open dialogue.
Okay.
It's a good example of how to approach these questions with transparency and respect for all parties involved.
So if we were to use that as a model,
Yeah.
is it even possible to envision a scenario where a deal for Greenland could actually work?
Hypothetically, yes.
Ethically? I mean,
Yeah, ethically it's possible,
okay.
but it would require a level of meticulous planning transparency
Uh-huh.
and genuine respect for Greenland's self-determination that we haven't always seen in historical examples.
Yeah, it sounds like we're walking a tightrope here.
Yeah.
One wrong step,
Yeah,
and the whole thing could fall apart.
absolutely.
It's easy to get caught up in the hypothetical.
Right.
But we can't forget that there's a lot of historical baggage associated with these kinds of deals.
That's a crucial point. History is full of examples where these types of agreements resulted in exploitation cultural assimilation
Right.
and lasting harm to the people and their land.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we have to proceed with caution and learn from the mistakes of the past.
Absolutely. But it's also important to remember that Greenland isn't some passive player in all of this.
Right.
They have their own government, their own resources,
Of course.
and a growing desire for greater autonomy.
Absolutely.
Any deal with the U.S. would have to recognize and respect their strengths and aspirations,
Yes.
not just their vulnerabilities.
I completely agree. It's not about the U.S. sweeping in to save Greenland,
Right.
but rather about exploring a potential partnership that benefits both parties equally
Okay.
and respects the unique needs and goals of each.
I like that.
And let's not forget, Greenland has some incredibly valuable assets that make them an attractive partner.
Like what?
Their strategic location in the Arctic
Okay.
and their abundance of natural resources like rare earth elements are increasingly sought after in today's world.
So there's definitely a lot on the table here.
There is.
But before we get too carried away with the potential benefits for the U.S.,
Right.
let's circle back to what's in it for Greenland.
Okay.
What would those economic subsidies and defense benefits we mentioned earlier actually look like in practice?
Well, economic subsidies could take various forms from investments in infrastructure and education to financial assistance for developing Greenland's industries. Imagine a Greenland with state-of-the-art schools, hospitals, and transportation systems with thriving businesses and a skilled workforce.
Okay.
It has the potential to significantly boost their economy and create new opportunities for their people.
That sounds like a pretty compelling argument.
Yeah.
What about those defense benefits? Would those come with strings attached?
Well, Greenland's location in the Arctic makes it a strategically important area for monitoring military activity.
Right.
A partnership with the U.S. could enhance their security and provide access to advanced military technology and training. It could potentially give them a stronger voice on the global stage and a greater ability to protect their interests.
I can see how that could be appealing.
Right.
Especially in a world with rising geopolitical tensions.
Uh-huh.
But I also imagine it would raise some eyebrows among other countries.
Possibly, yeah.
Wouldn't increased U.S. military presence in Greenland cause concern among Russia and other Arctic nations?
You're raising a valid concern. Any increase in military activity in the Arctic is going to be closely watched by other countries with interests in the region.
Right.
It would be crucial to ensure that any defense cooperation is transparent and doesn't escalate tensions or contribute to an arms race.
Okay.
It's a delicate balance.
So it seems like every aspect of this hypothetical deal is a balancing act.
It is.
We're weighing potential benefits against potential risks.
Yeah.
Trying to find a path that respects Greenland's autonomy while also addressing the interests of the U.S. and the broader international community.
Exactly, and that's why it's so important to have these conversations and explore all of the angles. This isn't a decision to be taken lightly.
Right.
There are real consequences to consider.
And I think it's important to zoom out a bit
Okay.
and consider the bigger picture.
Yeah.
How would a deal like this impact the overall geopolitical landscape,
Mm.
especially in the Arctic region?
That's a great point. The Arctic is becoming increasingly important geopolitically,
Uh-huh.
with many countries vying for influence and access to resources.
Right.
A deal between the U.S. and Greenland would inevitably shift the balance of power in the region,
Wow.
which would have ripple effects on international relations.
So we're not just talking about two countries making a deal.
No, we're not.
We're talking about potential shifts in global alliances, economic partnerships,
Yeah.
even military strategies. This is a big deal.
Absolutely, it would be a major geopolitical event with far-reaching consequences.
Yeah.
And it's important to consider how other Arctic nations like Russia, Canada, and Norway
Hmm.
might react to such a shift.
Right.
Some might see it as a threat to their own interests,
Right.
while others might see it as an opportunity for cooperation.
Right.
It's hard to predict with certainty,
Yeah.
but it's something we need to be thinking about.
I think we've done a good job of unpacking some of these key issues.
Yeah,
We've talked about the ethical considerations, the potential benefits and risks
right.
for both sides, and the wider geopolitical implications.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything we're missing?
Well, one crucial aspect we haven't discussed in detail is the environmental impact.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Greenland is on the front lines of climate change,
Uh-huh.
and any deal would have to address the challenges of rising sea levels,
Right.
melting glaciers, and the potential impact on delicate Arctic ecosystems.
That's a use factor.
It is.
We can't talk about the future of Greenland without talking about the future of our planet.
Exactly. And it's not just about protecting the environment from harm.
Right.
It's also about exploring opportunities for sustainable development.
Okay.
Greenland has the potential to become a leader in renewable energy,
Uh-huh.
and a partnership with the U.S. could help realize that potential.
Instead of just extracting resources,
Right.
we could be collaborating on solutions to some of the world's most pressing problems.
Exactly.
But let's be realistic. Is that kind of collaboration really possible?
I believe it is.
Okay.
But it would require a shift in thinking on both sides.
Hmm.
It would mean moving away from a purely transactional approach
Right.
and embracing a more holistic and long-term vision.
Okay.
A vision where economic development, environmental protection, and social equity are all interconnected.
I like the way you're thinking, but I'm also wondering, how do we get from these lofty ideals
Yeah.
to a concrete plan of action?
Right.
Where do we even begin?
The first step is always dialogue.
Okay.
Open and honest communication between the U.S., Greenland, and all other stakeholders involved.
Mm.
It's about building trust, understanding each other's perspective,
Right.
and finding common ground.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that this isn't a zero-sum game,
Yeah.
but an opportunity to create something truly beneficial for everyone involved.
So before we even start talking about numbers or treaties,
Right.
we need to have a real conversation
Yeah,
about what we want this relationship to look like.
exactly.
What are our shared goals? What are our values?
Yeah.
What kind of future do we want to create together?
You've hit the nail on the head. It's about setting the right tone from the beginning
Okay.
and approaching this with a spirit of collaboration, not competition.
Hmm.
It's about understanding that this isn't just a business deal,
Right.
but a potential partnership that could shape the future of the Arctic and beyond.
I think we've done a pretty thorough job of unpacking this complex issue.
We have.
But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Okay.
I want to remind everyone that this whole idea is still just an idea.
It is.
There's no guarantee that a deal will ever happen,
Right.
or that it would even be the best course of action for either party.
You're absolutely right. We've explored a lot of possibilities,
Right.
but ultimately the decision rests with the people of Greenland.
Yeah.
They'll need to carefully weigh the potential benefits and risks
Uh-huh.
and decide what's best for their future.
Okay.
And that's where we'll pick up in the final part of our deep dive.
Welcome back to our deep dive on the idea of the U.S. buying Greenland.
Yeah,
It's been a wild ride.
it has.
From historical land grabs
Right.
to complex ethical questions. We've covered a lot of ground.
Absolutely.
But now I kind of want to shift gears a bit.
Okay.
We've thrown a lot of information your way,
Yeah.
but we really want you to walk away from this with more than just facts and figures.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, we're not here to tell you what to think.
Right, exactly.
What's most important is that you don't just accept everything you hear at face value.
Okay.
This is where critical thinking comes in.
Okay, I'm all for critical thinking, but how do we apply that to something as complex as this?
Right.
It's easy to get overwhelmed by all the different angles and perspectives.
It can definitely feel like a lot to process.
Yeah.
But a good starting point is to question your own assumptions.
Okay.
Think about what you believed about Greenland before we started this deep dive. Have those beliefs changed at all?
Okay.
And if so, how and why?
That's a great point. It's so easy to go through life with these preconceived notions
Yeah.
without really examining where they came from or whether they're even accurate.
Right.
It's like taking inventory of your Maple attic,
Uh-huh.
dusting off some old boxes and seeing what's actually inside.
Exactly. And once you've taken stock of your own assumptions,
Okay.
the next step is to seek out diverse perspectives.
Hmm.
Don't just rely on one source or one point of view.
Okay.
Read articles, listen to podcasts, watch documentaries, and most importantly, try to find voices from Greenlanders themselves.
That's crucial. We've been talking about this hypothetical deal in pretty abstract terms.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, this is about the lives and futures of real people.
It is.
They need to be at the center of this conversation.
Absolutely. And as you're exploring these different perspectives,
Okay.
pay attention to the language used, the sources cited,
Uh-huh.
and the potential biases of the author or speaker. Remember, information can be framed in ways that subtly influence our perceptions.
It sounds like we need to be media detectives,
Yeah,
constantly questioning and analyzing the information we're consuming.
that's right.
No more passively scrolling through headlines.
Exactly. The more informed you are, the better equipped you'll be to form your own conclusions.
Right.
And remember, it's okay to have questions, to disagree with certain points,
Okay.
and to change your mind as you learn more.
So we're encouraging our listeners to engage with this material critically
Yeah,
and come to their own informed opinions.
absolutely.
But let's be real, this topic can feel overwhelming.
It can.
There's so much to consider. Any advice on how to avoid feeling lost in a sea of information?
Focus on what resonates with you.
Okay.
What aspects of this conversation stood out to you? What sparked your curiosity?
Okay.
Use those points as starting points for further exploration.
Okay, so follow your interests and dig deeper into the areas that really grabbed your attention.
Yeah,
And maybe don't try to absorb everything at once.
right.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly. Take your time, break the information matter into manageable chunks,
Mhm.
and don't be afraid to revisit it multiple times.
Right.
Understanding complex issues takes time and effort.
And most importantly, stay curious.
Yes,
The more you learn, the more you realize how much more there is to learn.
that's the truth.
It's a never-ending journey of discovery.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
This particular journey started with a pretty provocative question.
Yeah,
Could the U.S. actually buy Greenland?
right.
And I think it's safe to say that we've discovered the answer is far from simple.
It's not a simple question.
We've uncovered a tangled web of historical precedents, ethical dilemmas,
Uh-huh.
geopolitical complexities, and environmental concerns.
Yeah, it's not a black and white issue. There are a lot of gray areas to navigate.
We've talked about the potential benefits, the potential risks, the importance of Greenland's self-determination,
Right.
and the need for a new kind of international collaboration that prioritizes mutual respect and shared goals.
Absolutely.
But at the end of the day, the future of Greenland is in their hands.
It is.
They get to decide what path they want to take.
And that brings us to our final thought-provoking question for you to ponder.
Okay?
Imagine for a moment that Greenland does decide to pursue some form of partnership with the U.S.
Okay.
What would you want that partnership to look like?
Hmm.
What values and principles would you want to see reflected in that agreement?
Okay.
How would you ensure that it benefits both parties equitably,
Right.
respects Greenland's culture and autonomy,
Uh-huh.
and contributes to a more sustainable future?
There are no easy answers.
No.
But we hope that by engaging in thoughtful dialogue,
Yeah.
challenging assumptions, and prioritizing ethical considerations, we can all contribute to a better future
Absolutely.
for Greenland, the Arctic, and the world as a whole.
It's a conversation that we all need to be a part of.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you've learned something new, and more importantly, that you've been inspired to keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Thanks for listening. SCE